Superior Unaliver slaughtered dozens right under the nose of the police in various countries. Listen to the end and they will explain how they were able to apprehend this villain in the simplest way possible. 1985 in the country of Canada, on the outskirts of Nova Scotia. There lies a vast wooded area. Many hikers and hunters frequent the area to take in the fresh air and to view its untamed beauty. This particular day in October was sunny and clear. This inspired an unnamed hunter along with his trusty dog to take a different route through the woods to see what they could possibly find. His dog got a hold of a strange scent and followed it. The dog trotted for a good distance away until it nearly lost the owner and then halted when it got to a small mound. When the hunter eventually caught up with the man's best friend, he found his dog standing over a human body. Between decomposition and the wildlife consuming all of its flesh and organs, it seems to be dressed in a young person's clothing. It appeared to be a female that had been deceased for some time. The hunter contacted the police and the body was identified as Elizabeth Tucker. She was a 17-year-old hitchhiker that had been missing since May of that same year. Her family was notified, and I'm sure that they were devastated over this loss. The police determined it was a homicide and had no clues or leads. A man named Gregory Ashford was questioned in connection to the case, which turned out to be a dead lead. The case was eventually filed as a cold case. 2 years later, 3 young men decided to rob a taxicab driver. During the robbery, one of them shot and unalived the driver. The men involved were Michael McRae along with Mark Gibbons and Norm Warren. After the robbery was completed, Mark Gibbons was unalived and his body was found near the robbery scene. This was likely to keep him quiet, allegedly due to Mark's unwillingness to participate in the homicide. We now have 3 victims of homicide, all from different walks of life. Watch to the end and you will see the correlation between these and much more. Now back to the story. For whatever reason, when Michael was brought in for questioning about the robbery, Michael confessed and implicated Norm Warren as the actual trigger man of his co-defendant and the driver. Norm was charged with the homicide but found not guilty during trial. On the flip side, Michael received 5 years in prison for his honesty and confession of the crime. Michael was all too familiar with jail as a juvenile. He committed various crimes throughout the years that caused him to be committed to several detention centers. As a juvenile, other male prisoners found him very attractive, and because of this, he was assaulted by the much larger juveniles. Fast forward to 1991, Michael was still serving time in prison for the robbery and homicide conviction. He was granted a 3-day weekend pass from prison. Canada allows inmates that were near to their expired sentence date to stay in halfway houses for short stays in order to visit family and friends. In March, Michael was granted a 3-day pass and he was very enthused to be free and finally spend time with his family. Around the same time, a man by the name of Robert Astley became romantically acquainted with another person he met at a local outing. Robert invited that person back to his apartment for some quality time and they left together. When they got to Robert's house, that person stabbed him multiple times in the neck, also in the chest, which caused him to be unalive. Robert's body was left in this locked apartment to decompose. Another day, an unfortunate man by the name of Gaten Ether was out enjoying himself at a local lounge. Gaten met someone whose company he enjoyed and invited the person back to his apartment. After that person spent the night, he stabbed Gaten until he was unalive. Much like the previous situation, the victim was left in the locked apartment to decompose. The police had no leads for either victim. Both cases remained unsolved and were filed under cold case. Michael McRae was enjoying his family and freedom so much that when his 3-day pass expired, he decided not to turn himself in and went on the run. 2 months later, Michael was captured by the authorities and returned back to prison. Michael was given additional time in prison for his escape. The following year, Michael completed his prison sentence and was released. During the month of May, an 11-year-old girl by the name of Nina was home with her mother, Joan Hicks. An unknown person gained entry into the apartment and strangled the 11-year-old Nina unconscious. The attacker then focused the attention on the mother. That mother was then savagely attacked and strangled unconscious as well. The unknown actor made sure that she was unalive by cutting her throat. That same attacker then went back to the child's bedroom and hung the child by a rope in the child's closet, unaliving her. The attacker then locked the bodies in the apartment to decompose and left. The following day, a witness identified Michael McGray as the last person leaving the apartment. The police located and brought Michael in for an interview. During his interview, they were floored by what he shared with them. Michael immediately confessed to the unaliving of Nina and her mother Joan. For an unexplained reason, Michael just began to spontaneously confess to several other unalived persons. He acknowledged unaliving both Robert Aseli and Gayton either back in 1991. He also gave explicit descriptions on how he committed these acts. Detectives were shocked to hear this, but they kept their composures so as to not alert Michael on how clueless they really were. Dumbfounded by his sheer honesty, detectives continued to ask Michael would he be willing to share any other information. Michael obliged them. He confessed to unaliving a teenage girl by the name of Kimberly Amarero back in 1985. Michael strangled her and buried her in a shallow grave. The detectives continued to press on with the questioning, and Michael continued to provide names and details of other homicides that he committed throughout the country and also in the United States. The officers were shocked that he provided the information willingly, but even more so that he was able to get away with so many homicides undetected. When it was all said and done, Michael had admitted to committing 16 homicides, 15 of which were in Canada and one was in the United States, in the state of Washington. The authorities believed that he was responsible for much more, but no evidence was found to connect him to additional homicides. Michael was found guilty for 11 homicides and was given multiple life sentences, but that wasn't the end of the story. When Michael was in prison, he was placed in the jail cell with another inmate. That inmate's name was Jeremy Phillips, who was at the end of completing his sentence. Michael found out that he was about to be released, so he strangled Jeremy until he was unalive. Michael was charged with the additional homicide as well.